I knew that going in. I knew it was going to be tough, and you have to kind of embrace that. That's, when you're looking to quit your job.
This is the How to Quit Working Show. Jeff Steinman believes entrepreneurship is the only true path to freedom. That's why he created the How to Quit Working Show, where you'll hear stories, insights, and inspiration from lifestyle fanatics who left their soul-sucking 9-to-5 job forever. Now, here's your host, author, entrepreneur, and ultimate lifestyle fanatic, Jeff Steinman.
Hello and welcome to the How to Quit Working Show. I know everybody listening to this show is working a full-time job and wanting to start a business on the side. Folks listening to this show, I know you guys aren't the type of people who want to go out and get some giant venture capital investment, some big, huge thing, and put everything on hold for 2 years while you build a business and then just kind of hope that it works. That's not what How to Quit Working is about. That's not how you quit working. That can be a great way to start a huge business if that's what you want to do, and that's the approach you want to take, but you don't have to take that approach. There's easier approaches that you can take, and one of them is called bootstrapping. And Brian Casel is going to talk about it's hard to say, bootstrapping on today's episode of the How to Quit Working Show. How do you get a business up and running when you don't have a lot of money and you don't want to go out for that big Shark Tank type of investment? Great stuff coming up, so don't miss this episode. Before we jump into that, I just want to invite everybody over to the How to Quit Working Circle on Facebook. Go to howtoquitworking.com/group, and that shoots you right over to Facebook, and then you can just click on Join Group, and you'll get right into the How to Quit Working Circle on Facebook, where we continue the conversation after the show. We talk about what struggles you're having. I give advice. There's other folks out there who give advice. You also are in a group of your peers, other people that want the exact same thing out of life as you do. And if you're surrounded by a bunch of job people all day, I'm sure they're wonderful people. They're great friends. They're great family members. But the influence from them is not what you need to start a business. So go over to howtoquitworking.com/group and join a group on Facebook. Now, without any further ado, let's get to Brian Casel. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, you've got some interesting advice to share with our listeners today. We're going to talk a little bit about bootstrapping, and tell us first a little bit about your history and how did you leave your job? Why did you leave your job and begin your own business?
Yeah, well, this is really exciting. Thanks so much for having me on today. I guess my story is, well, like a lot of us, it's kind of just a series of transitions. It was like one transition after another, right? I remember I started out as an intern at a web design agency. That goes back to about 2005. Then I worked at that web agency for about 3 years as a full-time employee. I did front-end web development, and I later kind of was promoted to project manager at the agency. But about 3 years in, I started to get that itch. Maybe there's something else out there. I'm not really sure if this is the right path for me. Am I going to be sitting at this job forever? And that idea started to creep into my mind. And then what happened was, so the next step was I went freelance. But the way that I came to that was at that web agency, I noticed that my company routinely hired freelancers to come in and work, just for a day or for a couple of days. And that was kind of the first time I realized, I guess web designers can actually make a living at this as a freelancer. You don't necessarily have to have a job.
Yeah. Well, and if you happen to be one of the people at the company who's in the interesting situation of seeing the invoices from the freelancers, you discover something else as well.
Yeah, I wasn't exactly in that position, but yeah, I guess I kind of just assumed at that time, and I was pretty young, in my 20s. This was my first job out of college, so
okay.
Yeah, but I assumed that they're freelancers and they come in and work for a couple of hours. I assume they go and work at other places and maybe they have their own clients at home. I mean, they must be making enough to support their bills, right? So that's when the idea came into play, and I started Googling and I came across Freelance Switch, that blog, which is now discontinued, but started reading up about that stuff. And then finally in January of 2008, I gave my 2 weeks notice and I went out on my own. Then from there, I was basically a freelance web designer. That lasted for maybe, the next 3 to 5 years. And that kind of takes us to today, so we're about 6 or 7 years now into me being self-employed. And what happened over the last 3 years or so was I started to have another transition. After freelancing for a couple of years, I kind of had that same itch. Like maybe this isn't really for me, because I guess the main thing was, working with all these different clients. Some of them were fantastic, but some of them, they can kind of get under your skin sometimes, and some clients can be a little tough to deal with. And I started to realize, I went out on my own. I'm a freelancer, but I kind of traded having one boss for having a whole handful of bosses, like all these different clients.
Yeah.
And I started to have that same feeling, like even though I'm self-employed, I still feel like I'm at a job. I'm doing things that I don't necessarily want to be doing all the time. I'm very tied down to these deadlines every week, to launch a new site or to deliver a new feature on a website or something like that. So that's when the idea of, maybe I should get into something more scalable, like products, started entering my mind. And I had been working quite a bit with WordPress as a web designer. So I began the very first product business that I launched was selling. I designed a few WordPress themes, templates for WordPress, and I sold those as one-off digital download products. And that was okay. That gave me the first taste of what it might be like to actually earn an income without being tied to, earning an income that is not billable hours.
Yeah. What did it taste like?
Oh, it was fantastic. I had, from that point on, I had the bug, and then as I grew into other things, I started launching other types of products, which led me into what is today my main business, Restaurant Engine. And that is a web design service for, as you might have guessed, restaurants. We offer the hosting, the management of the site, and we'll set them up with the site. It's kind of billed as a monthly recurring software as a service type of business. But really, the way that it has evolved over the last 3 years is it kind of turned into what's now being called a productized service, where my team and I set up the client's website. We'll input all their content. These are restaurants, so we're inputting food menus and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And then we'll actually help them maintain and make routine updates to the site. So we're still doing a lot of this manual work, and that takes a lot of time. But what I've been learning over the last 3 years is how to systemize everything and streamline it into processes. And then that enabled me to begin hiring a team. So today I have a small team of 3 other employees aside from myself. And all of those processes from, setting up the initial website, even our sales process, getting new customers on the service, to make ongoing updates, providing customer support, all of that stuff is handled without me. And it kind of runs like a machine, and it continues to grow. And then that frees me up to kind of focus on the bigger picture, whether that's growing the company, working on marketing, or, last month I was able to take a short vacation with my family and my new daughter. And it's nice to be able to kind of take some time off, take a day off here and there, and know that the business is still producing without me. It's still actually producing my paycheck without me having to log billable hours or looking back or get a salary kind of paycheck. So
yeah, sure. Well, tell us a little bit about, Brian, when you made that transition from working for a company to being a freelancer. How did that transition go? And I think the most important question that our listeners want to know is, how did you get clients?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was actually fairly easy in the very beginning, the initial transition. And I'll tell you why. Basically, I was a freelance web designer, and I really had a fantastic boss. And the company that I used to work for, I couldn't have asked for a better place to work, really. It wasn't that I couldn't stand the company or my bosses or managers or anything. It was really just that I had a hunger to go out on my own and see what's out there.
Sure.
But what happened was my former boss actually referred my very first 2 clients to me. And those were clients they were just too small for my big web agency to take on. But for me as a freelancer,
they were perfect.
Exactly. They were perfect, So he was nice enough to refer me those first 2 clients. My other couple of first clients in those very first few months mostly came. I had a couple of referrals from friends and family who knew that I was a web designer, and so that helped, bring in the very first few clients. Another thing that I did is I actually went onto Craigslist and I offered to do one, or I think it was like 1 or 2 websites for a business for free, just to really get that experience of what it's like to work with a client, and also put something in my portfolio. Of course, I don't recommend working for free for very long. I just did it very briefly initially, just to get that experience. So that kind of got the ball rolling, and so that initial transition was easy, but it was definitely challenging as I went throughout the first year. So at the time that I left my job, I'm like in my early 20s. I don't have a mortgage at this point. I'm single. I figured now's the time I'm going to do it. So I didn't have to, my expenses were pretty low, although I lived in New York, which is not exactly the cheapest place to live. But anyway.
We've had listeners who've moved out of New York. In fact, I've heard this twice. They actually moved out of New York to start a business because they need lower expenses.
Yeah, well, today my wife and I live in Connecticut, and yeah, that certainly factored into it.
Sure.
But anyway, like the first year of freelancing, so I left my job and I had savings enough to probably pay for my first 3 to 6 months of living expenses. And then through client work, that kind of extended that runway to about 8 or 9 months. But really, by the time I reached like 10 or 12 months in, my savings had dipped pretty close to zero there. So about 12 months into freelancing, it was just a gradual, just making lots of mistakes along the way with those very first few clients, sometimes taking on the wrong types of clients, just, not very business savvy at the time. And these are things that like every freelancer has to go through. I don't think that you can really learn these lessons until you kind of learn them the hard way and really get out there and try it. But that was the first year, and I did learn those lessons pretty quickly. And I remember by the second year, the beginning of that second year of freelancing, I started to make a few wiser decisions, and I actually saw my income grow to the point where I made even more than what I made working at the agency. So it kind of turned around in the second year, and then grew after that.
What was the thing that caused it to turn around?
I think one thing that I did was, so in the first year I focused heavily on just taking on my own clients. I really liked working from home and making my own hours. So I took on my own clients, but I was still kind of new in this industry. So that meant I took on kind of low quality clients, or that means low budgets. That also means clients who tend to be tough to work with, sometimes very late to pay their invoices or never pay their invoices. So those kind of issues cropped in. So what happened in around the turn of the second year was I started taking freelance gigs where I would go in and work at other agencies for a week here, a week there. And those were much more reliable paychecks. And in a way, it's kind of like going back to having a job, but I was still on a freelance basis, and I never intended to go back to having a job. And what that allowed me to do is just kind of temporarily give me a little bit of cash flow to continue on and try to grow my client's business. And so that's what I did. I would take a couple of weeks here, a couple of weeks there, go in and work at larger companies as a freelance web developer, and then go back home and continue on with my client work. That only lasted, throughout that second year. By the second and third year, I had a pretty good referral network of clients that business started to pick up. And then the other thing that really helped me grow, and this is probably something that a lot of freelancers still don't do, but it did allow me to kind of get ahead. And that is, I started writing a lot. I started writing articles and guest articles on blogs. So rather than just relying on referrals coming to me through my network, and that's great and all, but I was being a little bit more proactive, getting my name out there, writing these educational articles on websites. And then as the years went on, I even started to speak at local meetups, and that helped a lot as well. So just being a little bit more proactive about putting myself out there, that really went a long way to, when somebody reads an article online, that's when you start to get emails and phone calls from complete strangers, across the country, across the world, and that can really spur on the growth.
Excellent, excellent. Tell us a little bit about bootstrapping. What the heck does bootstrapping even mean?
Yeah, so bootstrapping, and that's kind of a term that it's kind of really a community in a way. Bootstrappers are entrepreneurs, founders of companies who are self-funding their whole way through, as opposed to going out and finding investors for a new startup.
As opposed to Shark Tank. The Shark Tank.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. As much as I love that show, it's
nothing wrong with it. It's just not for everybody.
Exactly. Yeah. Basically there are. This is pretty generalizing here, but there are basically two groups when you want to start a new business. There are bootstrappers, self-funders, and then there are funded startups. Going after venture capitalists. Yep. Or even going into debt, sometimes taking a bank loan. That's a route that I was never attracted to. It just never made sense for me. I never liked the idea of starting a new business by going heavily into debt or giving away large pieces of equity. That just never made sense to me. Because I kind of came from a freelancer's mentality, which is I do this work, I get paid for this work. And that's kind of the mentality that I brought with me into bootstrapping my products business. And that's what I actually spent a lot of my time writing and teaching courses on today is bootstrapping and productizing a service. These are the things that I really enjoy. And basically the whole concept behind it is you fund the early days of your business and you fund the ongoing growth from your customers. Your customers pay for your product or your service or your productized service, and the revenue that you generate from them, you reinvest back into your company to help grow it and push it further. So it's a slower, more organic way of growing. You're not going to see what's known as the hockey stick growth curve, where all of a sudden you're going and then boom, you're a millionaire. No, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
It's a slow, measured approach, keeping an eye on your cash flow, but just kind of focusing on providing real value to a small group of customers.
Well, if it's slow, why would anybody want to do it?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it comes down to freedom. When you're bootstrapping and you're self-funding, you're in complete control. If you have investors, they want to see a certain outcome. And that usually means they want you to grow very, very quickly and then get to some kind of sale. Maybe sell your company to Google or something like that, or rarely, but maybe have a public IPO. As a bootstrapper, you can just focus on building a business that sustains from a profitable business that is sustainable through your customers, and that can grow over time. And then you can even, and this is what I write and teach about, is you can systemize it so that it can actually completely run itself. You build systems and you build your team and you delegate, and then your business can just produce an income for you year after year after year, and then you could either focus on growing that bigger, or you could even let that kind of run on autopilot and then focus on building the next thing. And the big picture of all this is that you're building assets. And this kind of gets back to working at a job versus working on your own. Working at a job, you have your steady paycheck and the security of that. Well, I guess the security piece is arguable, but
very arguable.
Yeah. When you're on your own, you're building something of value. You're building an asset that grows in value over time. And later on, maybe you do want to sell your company to someone and have a big payout. Or maybe you just want to grow it to the point where it's producing a steadily growing paycheck for yourself from your own business. That's really valuable. I think that's what attracts me and a lot of others to the whole self-funding, bootstrapping. I guess I would just add one more thing there, and that's coming from a background as a freelancer and with this skill set. I'm a web designer. I know how to build a website. I know how to design and build web applications. Those are skill sets that really have allowed me to build a lot of these things myself. I have brought in teammates and other contractors and people and partners who have helped me with different things, but for the most part, I kind of know how to go about building the things that I need to build, and that's an advantage. And that also kind of attracted me to bootstrapping. Whereas if I didn't have those skills, I would need to have lots of money to go out and hire a team to build things for me. So,
what would you tell somebody who doesn't have those skills? Somebody who's not a web developer?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's just in my particular space, but there are all sorts of other skills out there. I mean, look at the skills that you have at your job today. How can you leverage those being self-employed? And it's a wide world out there. I want to kind of sound cliche here, but
it's okay. Stay away.
Especially when it comes to educational products, and that's something like right now I'm producing a course on how to productize a service, and this is an educational product that I'll be selling. But for instance, I was listening to a podcast. This was the Smart Passive Income podcast with Pat Flynn, and he had guests on there. I forgot their names, but one was elementary librarian teacher, mm-hmm. and the other was a high school football coach. And both of them were able to quit their jobs because the husband, the football coach, created a book. It was like a playbook for football coaches.
Oh, okay.
And she, the librarian, created, I think, some course materials that other school librarians can use to use in their classrooms. So, and their income from that, of course, they've built it up slowly. Again, self-funded bootstrappers. They've built that up slowly. And I mean, the income that they earn from that is far, many multiples more than what they've earned working for the public school system.
Yeah. Very cool. What's a couple of top tips, Brian, for somebody who wants to bootstrap a new business?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many, but I would say, just take it one step at a time and start small. Don't try to hit it out of the park on the first time, because you're not going to hit it out of the park on the first time. You have to get. I've always had this mentality of I want to get to that first try as quickly as possible so that I can get to the second try, because I know that the first one is not going to work out. And that's exactly what happened when I was freelancing. I quit my job. It went okay for a couple months, but the first year was pretty rough. But I knew that going in. I knew it was going to be tough, and you have to kind of embrace that. That's, when you're looking to quit your job, I mean, you can't expect to, you probably cannot expect to make the same salary in your first year that you're making right now. It's, of course, there are things you can do to mitigate that, but you want to learn those lessons the hard way and then internalize those lessons, and that's how you're going to get better. And it will turn around if you really kind of just go for it. That would be the biggest tip, and really just to kind of like leverage every step that you take. Like I said, learn the lessons the hard way, apply them to the next step that you take. Your first product might be like selling an ebook or doing a very simple productized service. I mean, that's what really excites me right now is these productized services, is that you can you can literally offer something. I know a copywriter. This is Joanna Weave. She runs Copy Hackers, and her productized service is she's a professional copywriter. She used to work at a job as a copywriter, and what she has been offering are website reviews. So for a one-time fee, she will review your website and give you. She'll record like a 60-minute screencast video of her going through your website and giving you actionable tips and advice for how you can improve like headlines and descriptions and just improve the copy to help you make more sales.
Excellent.
And she defines that as a defined scope, and there's a very specific price tag on that, and people can just go on the website and click buy now, and that automatically books her in the calendar to do that, and that's that, and that. That's just an example of what a productized service can be. So if you can look at something that you're doing in your job, like what's valuable, how can you perhaps offer that as some kind of service to clients? You'd be amazed. These days, it's so much easier than it was 5-10 years ago to kind of build something like that.
Yeah, I think you made a really good point about looking at what it is that you do, what it is that you do in your job, because I think folks tend to overlook the fact that, well, yeah, even though it's in a model that you don't necessarily want to be your future situation, there still is somebody who's willing to pay you for that thing, and that's worth looking at and using as a starting point when you're starting your own business.
That's exactly right. I mean, if you're at a job, your company pays you for a reason. You have a job description there. You have certain responsibilities, and those responsibilities are valuable to your company, and essentially they're valuable to the customers or the people who that company serves. So you can certainly adapt those to, in a way, it's like kind of like taking out the middleman, right? Like, just deliver your services directly to those customers.
Absolutely. Brian, how do you define success?
That's a great question. I think for me, and I think for a lot of freelancers and self-employed, like I said, with bootstrappers, for me, it's really about freedom. The freedom to just choose what I want to be doing every day, and the other thing that I'm really passionate about is just doing work that I personally enjoy, but that really has an impact on a lot of other people. I don't want to be kind of just doing kind of grunt work that moves something along. I'm trying to really make a change in someone else, whether that's through my writing, teaching, or putting out products that help businesses, be more successful. The things that I create, the things that I work on, the things that my team works on, we want to make our customers and our audience, we want to have an impact in some positive way.
Excellent. Well, Brian, what would you tell somebody who's sitting out there and they're thinking, I might think I want to do this, but I'm just not sure what to do next?
Yeah, I think for me, I've always had inspiration just by watching what other people are doing. I would love to just I'm constantly just subscribed to lots of blogs and podcasts of people, and the things that they write about and teach are helpful, but really what I'm most inspired by is just their personal stories. So you just go out there and look at someone and you kind of go back in the archives of their blog, or you talk to them in person, and you start to realize, like, hey, 2 or 3 years ago, they were in the exact same place that I'm in right now. And then you start to kind of map your path, along their same story. Of course, yours will be different and unique, and you'll have different turns and twists, but I think it really comes down to getting inspiration from what others are doing and seeing how you might get some kind of like actionable takeaway from what they're doing and just apply it in what you're doing. And I guess the other thing is that, and in my podcast, Bootstrapped Web, which I co-host with my friend Jordan Gal.
We'll link that up below the show.
Yeah, cool. And so our tagline there for the whole podcast is, we learn by doing. That's kind of the theme of everything. You can read a bunch of books out there, you can read articles and tutorials, and those will help move you along, but really you're not going to learn the lessons that you ever need to learn until you get out there and just do it. And you got to make those mistakes, you got to get to those mistakes and then get past them. And then that's how you'll really learn.
Excellent. Brian, where can we go to get more information about you and your podcast and anything else we might want information about?
Great. So my blog is casjam.com, and I also have a newsletter there where I send out weekly articles, tips, advice to help you level up, whether you're at a job or whether you're freelancing or bootstrapping. Those are the things that I write about. I have courses there. Right now I have a free course called Productize Your Service. You'll find that right on the homepage of casjam.com. And launching on October 21st, I don't know when this is publishing, but on October 21st, I'll be opening up my course called Productize. And so that's the best way to connect with me. I'm also, and you can send me an email through there as well, or email me anytime at brian@casjam.com. On Twitter, I'm at CasJam, and I do host a podcast called Bootstrapped Web. That's at bootstrappedweb.com as well.
Excellent. Well, we'll link that all up below. The website is CasJam, CasJam.com. It'll all be linked up below the show. Brian, thanks so much for coming on the show. Thanks for sharing your experiences and showing these great, valuable tips with our listeners.
Thanks so much, Jeff. It was fun.
Great advice from Brian Casel. Go check him out at casjam.com, CasJam.com, his podcast. Everything will be linked up below the show. But, really give some serious thought to what Brian said and check out his website for more on bootstrapping, because it's a really important topic, because I know that folks listening to this show, you're not the type of people, and I'm not the type of person either, that wants to get some kind of big, giant investment and take a big risk and jump off a cliff and start something really huge right away. You want to get something rolling while you're still working, and bootstrapping is just the only way to do that. That's how I started my entire business. Everything's been bootstrapped. And it's a whole new way of looking at things, and I think it makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. One of the things that irritates me a little bit about the big Richard Branson and Gary Vaynerchuk and Mark Cuban of the Dallas Cowboys, those are folks who, let's face it, they breathe entrepreneurship. And they bleed entrepreneurship. They eat, sleep, breathe, and bleed entrepreneurship. And, that's great and that's inspiring. And I'm glad that we have leaders like that in this world. But the fact of the matter is, everybody's not like that. Everybody doesn't have that same passion for entrepreneurship. I am pretty gosh darn passionate about entrepreneurship. But frankly, if it wasn't a means to an end, if it wasn't a means to a lifestyle, I would not be probably as interested in it as I am. So some of us view entrepreneurship as a means to an end. Some of us view it as an end in and of itself. It doesn't matter which you are. It's okay. I just think it's important that we get the perspective out there of it being a means to an end, and Brian gave us some really great ways to use it as a means to that end, and that end being an amazing lifestyle that lets you do what you want when you want. Speaking of which, go over to the Facebook group and let's keep talking about amazing lifestyles. howtoquitworking.com/group. Click join group. We'll approve your request right away, and then we can keep talking. I look forward to meeting you over in that group on Facebook. And until next time,
thanks for joining us on the How to Quit Working show. Tune in next time when we'll talk to another amazing person just like you who is now living the ultimate life of freedom and doing it on their terms. If you want to learn how to quit working and get these episodes delivered directly to you, visit howtoquitworkingshow.com.